winter of 1968, the top of the world was dark almost all day. And, somewhere up over the ice and black water of the Arctic, a single American bomber was carrying enough fire to change history. The aeroplane was a B-52G Stratofortress, launched out of Plattsburgh Air Force Base in New York on one of those Cold War missions they called Chrome Dome. You know, the nuclear-armed patrols that just circled near the Soviet Union, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. On board that bomber were 4 B-28 hydrogen bombs, each one way beyond Hiroshima, far below, on the frozen coast of northwest Greenland. The lights of Thule Air Base glowed against the polar night, radars sweeping the sky for Soviet missiles, Danish and Greenlandic workers leaning into a -30 wind, moving between barracks, trucks, and big white radar domes for the crew of the B-52. It was supposed to be just another long, bitterly cold shift. Nothing heroic, just hours of noise and checklist after checklist, until one small, very human decision turned that aeroplane into a slow-moving disaster. Before takeoff, an extra pilot grabbed a couple of soft foam seat cushions from the ready room and stuffed them over a floor heating vent behind his seat, just to keep his feet warm. Simple thing. People had done it before. Nobody thought it was a big deal. Hours later, as the bomber droned over the black water of Baffin Bay, somebody noticed a smell. At first, it was just a faint whiff of something, a little bit like hot plastic, or a heater left on too long.
What the hell? It's scorched down here. Smoke! Fire near the vents! An emergency! Mayday! Mayday! Fire near the cockpit!
Then it got sharper and worse. They pulled up the cushion, and there it was, the fabric starting to char, and underneath, insulation quietly burning. In a B-52, there's wiring, plastic, and fuel lines everywhere. Once that fire got into the space under the cabin floor, it started eating into electrical bundles, turning insulation into thick, choking smoke. They used every fire extinguisher they had, and for a minute they thought, okay, we got it. But the heat came back. The smoke got thicker, and suddenly the crew was losing control of their own aeroplane. The pilot turned toward Thule, the only real runway they could reach in time. He called the base through static and noise. "We have a fire on board. Request emergency landing." The bomber started down toward the Arctic coast, but the smoke was rolling forward into the cockpit, instrument lights glowing through a brown haze. Some gauges went dark, warning lights flickered. Systems dropped offline one by one, trying to land a 185-ton bomber on a snow-covered runway in polar darkness, with smoke in your face and electrics dying on you. That's not brave. That's suicidal. At some point, the captain just had to admit it. They were not going to make the runway. He gave the order no bomber crew ever wants to hear. Prepare to abandon aircraft. Out in the cabin, men snapped on helmets and oxygen masks, checked their straps. You can almost hear them thinking, this is actually happening. They watched the glow of Thule Air Base grow in the window below, the only little island of light in hundreds of kilometers of black ice. They waited until they were roughly over those lights, so at least rescue teams would know where to start looking. Then one by one, they pulled the handles. Ejection seats blew into the night, small jets of flame, parachutes blooming in the freezing air, thousands of feet above the ice. 6 men made it out. One did not. The co-pilot, who had given up his own ejection seat so the extra pilot could fly, had to try and escape through a lower hatch in all that smoke and chaos. He never made it clear of the aeroplane, and he died at trying to get out. Now the B-52 was empty, just a burning, wounded machine flying itself. It stayed in the air a little longer, descending slowly toward North Star Bay, the frozen sea near Thule. At 15:39, local time, the bomber hit the sea ice at a shallow angle. In an instant, the aircraft came apart across the frozen surface. The conventional high explosives inside the 4 hydrogen bombs went off like giant chemical charges, tearing the bomb casings to pieces, blasting plutonium and uranium into the air. There was no nuclear explosion, no mushroom cloud over the Arctic, and thank God for that. But a long scar of blackened fuel and twisted metal spread across the white ice, and a dirty radioactive cloud settled into the snow and broken sea ice. From Thule Air Base, men on duty saw a flash on the horizon, then a strange glow. Alarms went off. Search teams scrambled into the -40 wind on snowmobiles, tracked vehicles, even dog sledges, to find the surviving crew and whatever was left of the bomber. They found the men first, scattered across the ice, frostbitten, injured, but alive. Then they found the crash site, an American bomber, 4 nuclear weapons, smashed into the ice 7 miles from the base. Within days, a forward camp grew over the wreck. Tents and prefab huts, radio masts, floodlights, and a line in the snow marking where the radiation was worst. They called it Camp Hunziker. Here, in constant darkness and brutal cold, American and Danish teams worked around the clock, shoveling radioactive snow and ice into wooden boxes, pushing it with bulldozers into trucks and sledges, hauling it back to Thule. There, they melted the snow and ice and pumped the contaminated water into giant steel tanks. The whole operation got a code name: Project Crested Ice. Most of the workers wore warm parkas, gloves, wool hats, maybe a simple mask over their nose and mouth. Not the full sci-fi radiation suits you might picture. They breathed that freezing air, and with it, microscopic particles of plutonium. Years later, a lot of those Danish workers started to get sick.
These reports
Cancers,
confirm it.
strange illnesses, and they spent decades fighting for recognition and compensation, saying no one had really told them how dangerous the job was, recovering the bomb parts. That was another nightmare. The explosion had thrown components over an area almost 1 by 3 miles. Some pieces fused into the ice, others blown through holes into the dark seawater below. Divers and sonar teams went under the ice, working in black water just above freezing, trying to find the heavy secondaries, the parts of the bombs that held most of the nuclear material. In the end, they recovered enough pieces to account for 3 of the 4 secondaries, plus a mountain of contaminated wreckage. But parts of the 4th bomb were never found. Declassified documents later hinted that 1 secondary might have melted through the ice and sunk into deep water beyond the search grid. Officially, the general said everything important had been recovered. Nothing to worry about. Move along. Privately, the paperwork sounded a lot less sure. While the cleanup crews fought the ice and the wind, politicians were fighting a different kind of storm. Denmark had a public policy. No nuclear weapons on its territory in peacetime. Greenland, where Thule Air Base sits, is part of the Kingdom of Denmark. So when the public found out that a US bomber with 4 hydrogen bombs had crashed and exploded near Thule, people wanted answers, and they wanted them fast. For years, officials claimed this flight was just an emergency diversion, a one-off. Later, declassified US papers showed that armed flights over Greenland had actually been routine. The scandal got a name: Thulegate, proof that Denmark had quietly accepted American nuclear weapons on its Arctic territory, even while telling voters the country was nuclear-free. By the end of 1968, the United States said that 93% of the radioactive material had been removed from the crash area, and that whatever remained posed very little risk. Most of the contaminated ice and debris had been shipped away to be dealt with somewhere else, but scientists could still measure traces of plutonium around Thule, and the cleanup workers kept getting sick and kept fighting. The accident at Thule, coming just 2 years after the Palomares bomb drop in Spain, finally forced the US to take a hard look at its airborne nuclear alert. In the end, missions like Chrome Dome were shut down. The risk of flying nuclear weapons in circles around the world turned out to be just too high. Today, the Arctic around Thule looks empty again. Sea ice and dark water, rocky coastline, radar domes glowing faintly in the polar night. There's no wreck on the surface, no burned bomber to see, but somewhere under that ice, and deep in the memories of the men who worked at Camp Hunziker, the story of Thule 1968 is still there. A fire started by a shortcut with a cushion, a bomber full of hydrogen bombs falling onto the ice, a cloud of plutonium drifting over snow and seawater, and a reminder that during the Cold War, the world didn't just live on the edge at the front line. It lived on the edge, even far away, over frozen seas, in the dark. Thule was one more night when a handful of small human choices stood between business as usual and a history we might not have survived.